commercial plan, that commercial signal be captured within O9 and actually live integrated to your demand planning, to your IBP process. So we'll walk through that, starting up here with the commercial planning space. So we're going to transport ourselves into the life of a commercial planning user. And two particular users we'll be looking at are the key account managers, sales folks, sales account managers, those you know, and revenue management function. So typically your key account teams will be the ones interfacing with your customers, having to do all those hard, dirty, difficult negotiations. You know, all the sandbagging that they do, it's because they've got to go and deal with the difficult conversations every day. The revenue managers who we'll talk to are the ones who are typically giving a lot of advice, analytical insight, and recommendations about how can we do things better for our customers, for our consumers of our products. And a very typical view, if you work in sales, that you're going to see, that we see here on the plan, is actually thinking monthly about how am I performing versus my plan? What is the gap to my plan? So actually our latest commercial planning solution that you see here is our kind of core gap closure workflow. This is something that will be updated month in, month out, where we're looking. The pink dotted line we see on the chart here would be your phased annual operating plan if you're, say, the account manager for a major retail customer. And the green bars we see here are our forecasted sales for closing the year. And we typically are looking at this view either through a lens of NSV, sales, revenue, contribution margin, or volume. And actually all three are important typically for business. And what we see right now, we look at this picture, those green bars significantly below our cumulative plan for the year. So salesperson currently not on track to get that nice bonus and the new sports car, unfortunately for them. So what they need to do is actually get some ideas, some inspiration for how can we make some changes to this plan to deliver it. And this is where O9's revenue growth management capabilities come in. We see up at the top here, we've switched personas from key account management to revenue growth manager. So these are now typically our analytical folks giving advice, giving guidance. Now, where we make the shift with O9 is traditionally these revenue growth management capabilities would be done very much offline, relying on that sort of water cooler influence model, which is great, but it really has its weaknesses because it's relying on meeting that person at the water cooler, relying on that ad hoc conversation to have, and obviously the influence of one person to another. Now, what we're going to look at here as an RGM lead is, can we give some recommendations to that sales team on changes we could make to a trade promotions plan in this example? So this is actually a live example of O9's Trade Promotion Optimizer, our recommendation engine, where we bring in our data science, predicting what changes to, say, different discount mechanics we're doing, depths of discount, frequencies of events, gaps between events, adjusting all these variables and actually modeling, in the case of, say, a consumer goods business, what would be the consumer sales uplift in that, and then work back what the margin effects would be for both manufacturer and retailer. So we might set this up. We're still looking at this financial year for a gap closure perspective. We're going to target margin growth, running behind there, and leave up some of our constraints at the bottom here and ask the system to actually suggest changes to our promotional plan. Now, I don't know how many folks have seen a typical trade promotion plan before, but they often are a kind of calendarized group of events. And what we see here, what O9 provides, the blue bars on this calendar, all these different events we currently have in our committed plan. So these will be the ones currently in our demand plan, currently negotiated and signed off with customers. And then directly beneath them in the green bars here is where actually O9's recommendation engine has been querying all of our built-in models around promotion elasticity, that consumer sensitivity, looking at cannibalization that we would expect to occur between products to give a recommendation. So we see actually here the system shifting the timing of certain events and changing mechanics from being just basic price reductions to giving extra free products. All of this being driven by O9's data science, our AI/ML data science within the platform. And what we've done here is we look up at the top three charts, summarizing the commercial impact of this plan. Is we see we've taken a drop in volume with our scenario 1 that the system's generated. We've taken a bump in revenue, NSV, and a bump in margin. Actually, it's looking like quite a healthy suggestion. No surprise there. We did ask the system to optimize for margin growth. Now, the beauty of this is all of these shifts to this plan here, these recommendations coming from our system, are already coded up as events that can now be shared in platform back with that salesperson. So what I can do as a revenue manager is actually publish these proposed event changes back to my sales team. Jump back into the persona of our key account manager, our sales manager, and I'm still looking at that gap closure view, but what I now see down at the bottom of the screen is pre-populated all these different promotional event changes that the RGM analytics team are suggesting that would improve my plan. Now, anyone who's ever spent 5-10 minutes either as a salesperson or working with sales folks will know how much they despise with a passion, the administrative bureaucracy of having to actually code this stuff up and key it into a form. So the fact that we're making this so relatively touchless for them is a huge win. And what I can do now, back in my salesperson mode, is actually try adding some of these events to our plan. Click them on, and we actually add on these commercials. So effectively, every one of these events has a pre-event P&L simulation generated by O9, all grounded in our historic understanding of how these events have performed, modeled by our platform. And we can see actually with these two events, they are hitting our NSV target for the year. Look like sensible things to do. Small matter now, of course. This is all very internal facing and wonderful so far. I have to go negotiate with my customer if I'm a salesperson. And that means typically negotiating on things like the net price I might pay. Now we see down here at the moment, actually, the net price on this item is currently flashing a big red light here. That's because it happens to be currently priced below the enterprise-wide pricing guardrail on that particular product that we might have. Another really valuable feature here, many businesses, as part of their revenue management and their value generation, will have pricing guidelines for their products. And rather than have those guidelines exist in a PowerPoint document looked at once a year, we now store them and maintain them live in O9 to be owned by that revenue management team. And we can try adjusting that net price that we're going to negotiate to our customer up to $1.32 from 40 cents. And what we see now, as we've gone above the threshold price, the system itself is actually flagging to the end user that this event will be auto-approved. So rather than having a very cumbersome chain of approvals being necessary, you have the option to bring a lot more automation to these governance processes. So from a salesperson perspective, I had a gap to my plan. I looked at how I could make some short-term interventions to trade promotions, asked my revenue management team to help out with that. And what they've done is code that up in O9 from our recommendation engine, which I can now say, yes, happy with those two events, and they get stored. And this is really key to our innovation in O9, is every row you see in this table here is our ledger of all of the different commercial initiatives that the business is planning to do. So our commercial plans in O9 now exist as the sum of this set of different types of initiative, whether trade promotions, pricing activities, marketing activities, distribution or assortment changes. And each one of these events, we're capturing the kind of detail that helps us analyze it accurately post-event. And we're forecasting a P&L against every event before it happens. After the event, we actualize those P&Ls and understand, did we or did we not predict correctly, and use that to continuously refine that model. The beauty of this, as well as really tapping into how do we simplify that planning process for sales teams, notoriously hard to do. We've done that here, but we're now giving a very high quality structured data signal into our demand planning team and into our demand review. And so at that point, as I've submitted those events, we can now see over on the right-hand side, the status of those top two events we've just added is sent to DMR, to our demand management review, for our demand planning team and our S&OP team to handle. So at that point, I'm going to hand off to our demand review expert, Peter, to take with those events and do what he will and update the demand plan. Over to you, Peter.
All right. Thanks, Adam. Let's continue our journey and take ourselves into a demand review, where I'm going to be responsible for a product category, and I need to produce a forecast based off of the latest trends and also the most recent commercial inputs that Adam has put together. Now, when I start the demand review, I can see how we're performing in terms of our projections and our target to the commercial plan. I can explain the reason for that performance. How have we performed month over month? Are there certain periods in the demand review where we're not hitting our target? As well as what decisions do we need to make? So you see in the top left of the screen, I've prioritized product category 3 or product group 3 as a key decision and escalation that needs to be reviewed as part of this demand review cycle. Now, before we drill into that specific product group for decision-making, what's important to highlight is that there are many changes to the forecast at the tactical levels, small promo mechanic changes, small adjustments to the system forecast based off trends, and those are auto-passed and approved as part of the demand review. But I can get an overall summary in terms of cycle over cycle, last month, how much has the forecast changed, and what were the key drivers for that change this month. Now let's jump into this product group 3, which I've escalated for decision-making in this demand review, where I can see in these light blue colors, what is the current demand plan. I have a baseline demand, as well as commercial decisions that have already been included as part of the plan, which then sums up to my dark blue outlook, which I can now see has a gap to the target I have for product group 3. This is where the integration with our commercial teams is so important, because on the bottom of the screen here, you'll see I have the opportunities that Adam just prepared as part of his commercial planning that I can now simulate and include as part of my demand plan. So by selecting these opportunities, I can go ahead and simulate those volumes as gap closing initiatives, track the separate opportunities coming from the commercial team, as well as I can create different scenarios. I can create an optimistic view of this for my demand review, where I include extra opportunities or increased assumptions related to those opportunities. I can present pessimistic views or pessimistic scenarios, where I select fewer of these opportunities or more pessimistic volume outlooks as part of my demand review. Now what I can do is submit these for supplier review as the demand planning scenarios from our demand review. So now I'll switch into a different role, which is Pete, who's in part of the supply review. And my responsibility is to create the production plans, procurement plans, and distribution plans in order to service the demand that we just reviewed. Again, you can see the key performance for the plan that I'm responsible in terms of the overall volumes, my ability to service the demand, financials, inventory, and capacity utilization. And what's particularly important is that I'm going to prioritize commitments from last month first, and then evaluate these new forecast changes, these new opportunities, and to see what our ability is to service that demand. What I can then see is I have certain constraints, which you see in the red bars. I can see them summarized at the bottom right of the screen, that I have some raw material constraints that are preventing me from fully meeting these commercial opportunities. When I drill down into the constraints, in 09, we model the end-to-end supply chain from supplier capacities, inbound logistics, production capacity, outbound logistics, and DC. And what the plan is showing me is that I'm having a constraint where we see the red arrow at the top left of the screen, which is I have a raw material supplier that cannot fully satisfy the commitment. You'll also see something blinking in the bottom below is that I might have resolutions or prescriptions that are recommended by the system that I can source raw material from a different supplier that can go into an alternate bill of material and service the same demand. Now, this is a critical decision as part of our S&OP cycle, because now what we're saying is a non-standard flex decision is basically relying on our ability to meet this commercial opportunity that's going to make our numbers for this month. And this is where 09's supplier collaboration and risk capabilities are extremely important for us to analyze this decision and see if it's one that makes sense in order to base our plan upon. So when I click into that supplier, I get a full view of that supplier in terms of the top right, what's the capacity that that supplier has said they have available for me to produce, and what's my current utilization of that capacity. So there's some available capacity with this supplier in order to request additional requirements. Then below, you'll see what is our current contract spend with the supplier. There might be a minimum revenue or a minimum spend requirement that I have to spend each month with this supplier, as well as some maximum that I might not want to exceed in terms of a spend with a supplier. Then in the top middle, we can see what's our performance been with the supplier. What's been in the past, their ability to support our requests, as well as looking at non-standard or flex requests, what have been their responsiveness in the past and ability to support these POs when we place with them. So in general, the supplier looks pretty good. They have capacity, they're within our tolerances and have been reliable in the past. But then the last important piece here is that there's a risk score associated with this supplier. And if I drill down and analyze the risk of this supplier, O9 is creating a composite scorecard of all the risks associated from a market perspective, any geopolitical concerns, from a financial perspective, are there credit holds, from an environmental perspective, such as extreme weather or natural conditions. Which you can see, I have in red the exclamation point that there are some weather conditions that I'm concerned about, or that the system is creating a risk score for. And what's important here is these are the 80% of the data that lives outside of the organization that you don't have access to, that have a big impact on the quality and the feasibility of your plan. And the key challenge here is also getting this data into the system, which we can support by subscribing to partners that create these risk scores by mapping the tier 2, tier 3 suppliers that are the suppliers of your suppliers. And it's basically saying there's a risk at a tier 2 supplier, which is an area where there's been some extreme weather, perhaps some flooding, and that supplier was shut down recently, which is then giving me this overall risk as something I need to verify before I go and execute the plan. So this is where we continue with the supplier collaboration, which is now I'm ready to place the purchase order with the supplier. I can go ahead and collaborate directly in the platform externally with my supply chain partners, mentioning in terms of the flex capacity that I'm going to request, as well as the risk that we've seen, so that they can provide a view in terms of, is this something that they've experienced? Are they aware of this risk? Is it something that they are currently working through? Now, when I send this can send directly to a portal within the O9 platform that the supplier can access and integrate with directly, or it can shoot an email out to my supplier from the platform into their Outlook. They can respond, and here I have Falko, who's responsible for our supplier collaboration at O9, who is representing our supplier, saying they're aware of the risk, they have come out of the risk, and they'll be able to satisfy the demand. So to submit that, we can come back into our IBP decision framework and work on our financial plan in terms of we had a baseline plan, which was slightly below our target. We had the revenue and costs associated with that baseline plan. And then we made commercial decisions about new opportunities that we wanted to include as part of the plan. Additional supply chain levers looked at non-standard costs that we want to go and execute that we've thoroughly evaluated from a risk perspective. And we have a full P&L from our baseline plus our proposed S&OP scenario. To conclude, we can then promote this scenario into executive review, where the executives have one plan across commercial, supply chain, and finance that explains all the key assumptions and decisions from the incremental opportunities that the commercial team decided on, the non-standard supply decisions, and risk assessment from the supply teams that then can fully be executed in the market and operations based off of this cross-functional collaboration. So all put together, we have the commercial team, supply chain, finance, external partners working quickly on cross-functional scenarios to seize new opportunities and improve the planning and processes and decision-making in an IBP forum. We might have time for a few questions if anybody has any questions before we wrap up the day.
One or two questions.
One or two. If not, thank you very much.